Synopsis of the Books of the Bible. 1 Samuel. By JND Darby. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God, and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. 2 Timothy 3 verses 16 and 17. Synopsis of the Books of the Bible. By John Nelson Darby. 1 Samuel, chapters 18 and 19. Jonathan representing the remnant. But when Christ makes himself known, the remnant, which Jonathan represented, loves him as his own soul, and this beloved one becomes the object of his whole affection. This does not, however, in its bearing, go beyond the personal reign of Christ. Jonathan represents the remnant which has loved him in humiliation. As to this world, it is so always. There is a remnant who love Christ and desire his kingdom, although it will put an end to the economy in which they stand. Of the assembly, properly so called, there is nothing here. It is a remnant who desire the coming of Christ. Saul, who sought his own glory and endeavored to uphold his house by carnal means, seeks the death of him who is to come and establish the kingdom. So the Jews with Christ. The faith of David and that of Jonathan. The faith of David had rather a different character from that of Jonathan, although both conquered the Philistines. Jonathan is not deterred by difficulties. He sees the God of Israel and does the work of God which Saul neglects. It is the true and energetic faith of God's people. But David, the king, secretly so indeed, but chosen and anointed, meets face to face the great enemy of his people in all his might, the mere sight of whom dismayed the people, who fled before him. That which distinguishes the faith of Jonathan most touchingly is his attachment to one who, to judge after the manner of men, as Saul did, eclipses his glory. But Jonathan is absorbed by his affection for the one whom God has chosen. He sees in him the true head of Israel, worthy to be so, who, however, despised at the present moment, must prosper and reign as of God. It was also David's qualities which gained his affection. It was a personal attachment. He could appreciate David, and he forgot his own interests in thinking of him. The voice and the words of David sink deep into his heart, and bind him to the king whom God has chosen, while unknown, and in spite of everything. Saul, the professed head of the people, jealous of anyone who might displace either himself or his descendants, is at enmity with David and forsaken of God. He is the instrument of the enemy against Jehovah's anointed. At length, he falls by the more direct and open power of the enemy of God's people. Sorrowful end of that which had been a vessel of blessing and an instrument in the work of God, although but in a carnal way. Saul's jealousy and David's true glory. God causes David's true glory to outshine the official importance of Saul. The victories of the former are sung in such a manner as to excite the king's jealousy. We will now briefly trace the features of David's faith in these new circumstances. Never does he lift his hand against Saul. He serves him obediently, he does his duty, and patiently bears the jealousy and malice which pursue him. Poor Saul! Troubled by the evil spirit, David plays on the harp to soothe him, and Saul seeks to slay him. David escapes. Saul fears him, for the God by whom he is himself forsaken is with David. He employs him at a distance from himself, but where he is more than ever in the view of the people. God always carries out his purposes in spite of all the carnal precautions of man. David is prudent. He has the wisdom of God, who is with him in all his ways. Energetic and unpretending, always successful, he is beloved by all Israel and Judah, before whom he goes in and out with all the strength and superiority of faith. Saul's continued hatred, Jonathan's intercession. Saul seeks to turn all this to his own account. Apparently, he honors David, but he only does so in order to expose him to the enemy and get rid of him. David abides in his lowliness, and Merab is given to another. Michal affords Saul a more specious opportunity. As he was only required to destroy the power of the enemies of God's people, David accepts Saul's proposal and succeeds. Saul perceives more and more that Jehovah is with David, and becomes still more afraid of him, sad development of a sad state of soul. Yet Saul was not deficient in fine points of natural character, which manifested themselves at times in better feelings. But God was not in them. 1 Samuel 19. Jonathan's intercession has power over his father, and for a time all is well. But Saul, being forsaken of God, cannot bear that he should be with David. War breaks out, and David, God's own instrument in what he does for his people, defeats the Philistines and drives them away. It will be observed here, that it is the Philistines who are through whom the power of faith is in question. It is with them that the battle of God and of faith is fought, that David always succeeded, and that Saul failed. David taking refuge with Samuel. Saul is again troubled, and David, who seeks to refresh him, narrowly avoids being slain. He makes his escape and goes away to Samuel. Remark here how the grief, which egotism and self-love produce, makes room for the action of the evil spirit on the soul. The power reappears here, which, hidden as it was, still governed the fate of Israel. David recognizes it, and, when he can no longer remain with Saul, he does not seek in unwise to magnify himself by rising up against the outward form which God had inwardly judged but not destroyed. Instead of opposing it, he contents himself with acknowledging that manifestation of the power of God which had placed Saul in his royal position, and from which he had himself received the testimony and the communication of the strength and of the will of God. He takes refuge with Samuel. He is pursued thither by Saul and by his messengers, who, with their master, are subjected to this same power, a power which does not influence their hearts or guide their conduct, a power of which Saul had forfeited the blessing. What a picture of a useless, ruined vessel! Sometimes prostrate under the energy of Satan, sometimes prophesying in that of God, from whom his heart is far away, by whom he is forsaken. His outward conduct is not disorderly. He does no harm except when Jehovah's anointed excites his jealousy and his hatred.